Is this time different? Well, Betteridge's Law has something to say about that. But one thing that is definitely not different is that today is Wednesday, and that means it is DCA Wednesday. Are you ready to get that stack on? This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as financial advice. All views expressed on this podcast are solely the opinions of the host and/or any guests that we might have from time to time. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or to follow a particular investing strategy. Hello, you sexy sat stackers, and welcome to the latest episode of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast. As usual, I am Chris. And today is Wednesday, June 21st, 2023, and that means it is DCA Wednesday. We have a lot to talk about, but as usual, most of the buzz out there is around Bitcoin's price action and the things that people think is affecting the price of Bitcoin this week. But before we get into all of that, let's take a really quick look at the vital statistics. At the time of this recording, we are sitting at a block height of 795,376. And alluding to the price news, one Bitcoin will currently cost you $30,170 US, or one filthy US dollar will only purchase you 3,315 sats per dollar. And that is up substantially from the last several weeks. Actually, that's as expensive as we've seen Bitcoin in over a year in US dollar terms. But I digress. We are currently 44,624 blocks from the halving, and regardless of what you think might be influencing the price, when it comes to Bitcoin's 4-year cycles, it is all about that halving. As you know, the miner reward, the new Bitcoin issued to miners for discovering and minting the next block of Bitcoin, is cut in half every 210,000 blocks. That works out to about every 4 years. It's programmatically every 840,000 blocks. And we are coming up on that magic number. It looks like that's going to happen approximately April 21st of 2024. And if you've been following Bitcoin for any length of time whatsoever, you know that that is traditionally the start of the next, not necessarily bull run, but the next euphoric phase, the next parabolic move in Bitcoin. You know, that's when you look forward to setting the new all-time highs, not on the halving date, but traditionally 6 months to a year or 18 months after that halving date. But yeehaw, that's when things get really exciting. Speaking of exciting, Bitcoin's market cap is up substantially as well. It is currently ringing in at $585.4 billion. That is the highest Bitcoin market cap we've seen in probably about a year as well. Obviously, because the price of Bitcoin is up, so the market cap is up. If you value your wealth in shiny yellow rocks, one Bitcoin will currently cost you 15.7 ounces of gold. That's almost an entire pound of gold. If you are a gold bug that's been thinking about getting into Bitcoin, if you've realized that Bitcoin is electronic gold and you're looking to make that move, it's getting more and more expensive. You know, last week it was only about 13 ounces of gold, only 13 1-ounce gold coins to purchase just one Bitcoin. That amount is going up. You are about to get priced out of Bitcoin if you dally much longer. And for those of you who value your wealth in pizzas, it will currently, one Bitcoin, pardon me, sorry about that. I'm having a little bit of trouble with my spreadsheet, my show notes. It keeps crashing on me. I'm sitting here in my studio in, not sunny Central Florida, the Space Coast of Florida. Today is far from sunny. I jokingly say we've got the lightning network in full effect here. You know, traditionally, this is hurricane season, so traditionally in the afternoon during hurricane season, we get afternoon thunder showers. But as with a lot of the United States right now, we've just had storm after storm moving across Florida for more than a week now, and we've had some pretty impressive lightning. So there isn't any so loud right now that it's distracting me, but if you hear any loud bangs in the background, that's probably what that is. But I digress. One Bitcoin will currently purchase you 1,687 large pepperoni pizzas from Papa John's. That is a heck of a lot of pizza. That's more than 200. In fact, that's 210 more pizzas than one Bitcoin would have purchased you just 2 years ago. Correction, just 2 weeks ago. And any way you slice it, no pun intended, that is a heck of a lot of pizza. The mempool is looking a little more clear. It is nowhere near nowhere near 0 blocks pending the mempool. That running bet between Marty Bent and Matt Odell is nowhere near getting settled yet. Although it is down substantially. 2 weeks ago there were 69 blocks worth of transactions pending in the mempool. 3 weeks ago there were 92 blocks worth of transactions pending in the mempool, and right now there are only 49 blocks worth of transactions pending in the mempool. So down significantly, although still a lot. Most of those are those tiny ordinals and inscription transactions. Along those lines, if you do want to make an on-chain transaction, the fee estimators are saying it's going to take a fee of about 46 Satoshis per VByte to guarantee that transaction is included in the next block, although a fee of as little as 11 sats per VByte should get that block confirmed within a day. Mempool.spaces fee estimators a little bit different. It's saying a high priority transaction should only take a fee of 33 sats per VByte, which works out to about $1.39 in current US dollar terms as far as a high priority transaction goes. Of course, a lowered priority transaction, 11 sats per byte, would be significantly less than $1, which is still pretty cheap considering you're moving basically electronic gold anywhere in the world, and it's uncensorable, unconfiscatable, immutable. Try sending an international wire for $1.39, or Western Union, or try mailing a check, for $1.39. And speaking of mempool and on-chain activity, that metric that I like to follow, Bitcoin's 24-hour transaction rate, is currently averaging 4.12 transactions per second. That's been trending down steadily. Last week it was 4.76 transactions per second. Before that it was 5 transactions per second. Obviously before this whole ordinals and inscriptions hubbub, kerfuffle, if we got anywhere near 4 transactions per second, Bitcoin was absolutely screaming. Traditionally, for the last 2 years of this podcast, anytime we saw more than 3.15 transactions per second was usually an indicator of just a lot of Bitcoin activity. But with all those tiny transactions enabled by Taproot, that obviously has changed that metric completely. But the fact that it's trending down, that there's only 4.12 transactions per second moving through the network right now, means maybe that ordinals inscriptions BRC20 token fad is dying down somewhat. And speaking of on-chain activity, since we last spoke, there was a difficulty increase of 2.2% in the difficulty it takes to mine just one block. As you know, Bitcoin adjusts its mining difficulty every 2,016 blocks, which is theoretically every 2 weeks, with the aim of establishing an average block time of 10 minutes in between blocks. And currently, blocks are averaging 10 minutes and 12 seconds between blocks. So that is why they're looking at a difficulty increase. Actually, that should be a difficulty decrease. I have no idea why they're estimating a because I read my notes wrong. That's why. We're currently 944 blocks away from the next mining difficulty adjustment. About 2 weeks from now, 13 days, 12. My notes are completely messed up on this. Let me get straight to the horse's mouth and look at this on Clark Moody's dashboard. We are currently 943 blocks away from the next difficulty adjustment, which looks like it's going to be next DCA Wednesday, June 28th, Elon Musk's birthday. And that's currently looking like it's going to be a substantial decrease of anywhere up to minus 2.3%. However, that is still a week away, so that's subject to change. And the big elephant in the room right now is the Texas heat wave. As you know, a lot of big commercial miners are based in Texas, and they have those agreements to help balance the load that when electricity demand is high, they shut their miners off. And if you've been following the news, you know that Texas is asking Texans to conserve power. So it would stand to reason that some of those miners, such as Riot's big mining facility in Rockdale, Texas, will be coming offline. If that's the case, then we should see block times increase potentially even more, depending on how long that those miners are offline and what percentage of the hash rate actually ends up going offline. But anyway, that's just a general idea of what's going on as far as hash rate goes. That's all an estimate anyway, because it's basically random luck whether a miner finds a block and whether they find one in 1 minute or in 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Sometimes that's just the random chance of it. So that's why Satoshi, when he wrote the Bitcoin Core Protocol, adjusted the mining difficulty every 2016 blocks, because the more blocks you have, the larger sample size you have, the more likely you are to get an accurate read and to know whether you need to adjust the difficulty up or down without seesawing it all over the place and having huge swings up and huge swings down. Kind of like an airplane, some of the older autopilots would get what they called the Dutch rolls, where if you were holding a heading or an altitude, the plane would go up, it would overshoot the altitude, and then down and undershoot the altitude, or it would, if you're tracking an airway or a heading, it would cross through the heading and then back to the heading and end up just kind of serpentining back and forth across the heading it was looking for. And that's what Satoshi was trying to avoid when he made the block time basically every 2 weeks, as opposed to chains out there that make that adjustment pretty much on the fly, and therefore they are just completely inconsistent. One of the things that's extra genius about the Bitcoin Core Protocol. Real quick, thank you to those of you listening on your favorite Podcasting 2.0 app. I've been pimping Podcasting 2.0 apps such as Fountain or Breeze Wallet pretty much since they came into existence. And one of the cool things about Podcasting 2.0 apps is you can earn sats for listening to your favorite podcasts, but you can also help support your favorite podcasts by sending them a boost or streaming them a sats per minute basis in what's referred to as value for value. But speaking of boosts, we do have one boost, and that's from longtime supporter of the podcast, Leggy. Leggy boosted 6,000 sats and simply said, "Better late than never. Thanks." And that's in response probably to the last episode, which was after midnight East Coast time, if you're listening in the East Coast or in Europe, but just barely before midnight, because I was recording it in New Mexico, which was on Mountain Standard Time, which is 2 hours different than where I am in Florida right now. And so thank you, Leggy, for that boost. That's always great to hear from you. And speaking of listeners, our geographic distribution of listeners has changed just a little bit since last week. It had been pretty consistent with 52% of you listening from the United States. That is unchanged. 13% of you are listening from Argentina still. So muchas gracias, amigos in Argentina. 7% of you are listening from Germany. So danke, mein Freunds in Deutschland. 4% of you are listening from Luxembourg still. That's also exactly the same. So danke or morgen, mein Freunds in Luxembourg. And where the change is Canada has moved up one position to number 5. It's still just 2% of our listeners from Canada, but they ring in at number 5 now instead of number 6. So thank you to our friends living rent-free in the attic of America, as Greg Foss likes to say. Spain ranks number 6 with 2% of you listening from Spain. So muchas gracias, amigos in España. Venezuela comes in at number 7 with 2% of our listeners. So muchas gracias, amigos in Venezuela. And then Colombia has slid down to number 8. Now, there's still 2% of you listening from Colombia, so it's kind of a technicality. But right now, Colombia is ranked number 8. So muchas gracias, amigos in Colombia. And Sweden has moved up one space, number 10 with 1% of you. Sweden was number 10 with 1% of you last week, and there's still just 1% of our listeners, but Sweden has moved up to number 9. And for the first time in the top 10, France has moved into the top 10 with 1% of you listening from France. The big change is Australia had been number 9 last week. They've dropped off completely because lurking at number 11 is Singapore with 1% of our listeners listening from Singapore. So that's really cool. I don't think I've seen Singapore anywhere near the top 10 before. So welcome to our listeners from Singapore. Thank you very much for listening. All right. So a little bit of what's going on in the news this week. As you know, if you've been listening, if you haven't been living under a rock, most of the hubbub, most of the buzz this last week, and probably the reason for the Bitcoin price pump, is the rumors of BlackRock getting in, filing rumors, the speculation because BlackRock is filing to list a Bitcoin ETF or possibly a Bitcoin trust, depending on who you're listening to. Also, Deutsche Bank is announced that they're going to be custodying Bitcoin. Fidelity, I believe, is getting into the Bitcoin ETF business potentially as well. All of this is leading people to say, is this time different? Is this going to be different than the previous cycle? Are we going to break out of the 4-year cycle finally? And if you're familiar with Bettridge's law, that's the law that says anytime that a headline ends in a question mark, or any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered by the word no. And I would firmly believe that this time is not going to be different. I'm not trying to be a downer. In fact, that's kind of hopeful in my opinion, because I'd like to continue purchasing Bitcoin for as cheaply as possible, as long as possible. But even if you just get down to the specifics, is this time really different? Well, no, not really, because last cycle, we had the ETF hype as well with was it Van Eck and other people's at other institutions that had filed to list spot Bitcoin ETFs. And 2 cycles before that, the hype was around Bitcoin futures. So it seems like, we're doing exactly what Bitcoin always does, even when it comes to the hype with that institutional money and the FOMO around, or the hopium around institutional money pouring into Bitcoin. So it remains to be seen. What is possibly different is I have a hard time believing that BlackRock would file for an ETF without being pretty confident that they would be approved. A lot of people point out to BlackRock's track record. They've only ever been denied 1 time out of 500 some odd filings for ETFs. Obviously, those were ETFs in traditional assets. It wasn't something new like, a Bitcoin ETF. But nonetheless, BlackRock is a huge player. They have something like 1% of the total global wealth under management. And that means a couple of things. It means they have a lot of politicians bought and paid for. If BlackRock says jump, many of the politicians out there immediately respond, how high? So maybe BlackRock has already smoothed the way, greased the rails, paved the way for this ETF, or maybe they're just flexing on the SEC. That remains to be seen. But what doesn't remain to be seen, or what I'm confident of, is that this time isn't necessarily any different. We're basically doing exactly what we did in 2019. If you listen to Adam Meister and you follow his 210,000 block theory, which is basically the 4-year cycle theory, we're repeating 2019. And 2019 had its peaks and valleys. Bitcoin rocketed way up about this exact point in time during the previous cycle in 2019, and then it tanked all the way down. And of course, it tanked all the way down to like 3,000 because of the virus crash. Maybe that was a black swan event, but nonetheless, it didn't just go sideways for a year. It ramped up to, over 10,000 and then dumped down to 3,000 and zigzagged all over the place until after the halving, really, because even after the halving, it took several months for Bitcoin to get to a new all-time high. In fact, the halving, was in the spring of 2020, and we didn't set a new all-time high until December of 2020. Also in the news were Apple basically has been flexing, exerting its power over a couple of popular apps, not the least controversial which is Damus, over their Zaps, which is basically tipping using the Lightning Network. Apple has the policy that they don't allow in-app purchases unless they go through the Apple Store, because Apple wants a 30% cut of any money spent on an app. And they're claiming that tipping somebody is purchasing a digital asset or a digital good. And obviously that's bunk. You're not buying anything when you tip somebody for content. But they've also gone after the Zeus app, which lets you manage your Lightning node, and allegedly they're going after the Fold app as well. It remains to be seen whether Apple is just being greedy and trying to make a cash grab on these companies, or if maybe they're bowing to pressure from the administration, which has been aggressively anti-Bitcoin. We do know that the administration had exerted a tremendous amount of influence over apps such as Twitter, big tech companies, for example. So it would not surprise me that if somebody in the administration reached out to Apple and said, hey, crack down on Bitcoin apps, and they were doing so. Who knows? It remains to be seen. And of course, I think all that's going to do in the long run is damage Apple. I'm recording this podcast on an Apple iPhone as we speak. I'm an Apple user, not because I prefer Apple over Android. There are many, many, many things I don't like about Apple. So, Apple, if you delete my Damus app, my Zeus app, and my Fold app, you're just going to convince me to go back to an Android. And that will, I'm sure I'm not the only one. So I think that'll ultimately either backfire on Apple, or remember when Apple had banned Bitcoin wallets for the longest time and they eventually caved because, while they do take, while they are beholden to the administration, and while they may be acting in a manner that's greedy and wanting money, they're also greedy about not wanting to lose customers. And these iPhones are really expensive, super overpriced. It's one of the many things I don't like about Apple, their prestige pricing. So if people start bailing out of iPhones, we'll see them change their minds really quick. Not exactly having to do with Bitcoin per se, although kind of. This actually happened in April, but it's just now starting to make waves. The Supreme Court basically made a ruling where they said that they limited the power of administrative law judges, and this had to do with the SEC and the SEC specifically, that these federal agencies have what are called administrative law judges, and these are not judges, they're basically hearing officers. Every agency has them. In fact, one of the things that you'll see people talk about when they talk about Bitcoin and seizure resistance are, the stories where people are traveling with their life savings. For example, the one person that was flying somewhere to purchase a truck for his small business had like $40,000 of cash with them, and they seized it just because traveling with money, according to the government, is probable cause that you're breaking the law. Well, that's an administrative law judge that does these seizure hearings. And administrative law judges have basically dictated policy in this country for a long time. A lot of the EPA regulations and a lot of the things the SEC does or allows or doesn't allow are not necessarily, authorized by. Well, they're not constitutional at all, because the Congress hasn't said. The Congress is responsible for writing laws, and they haven't written a law. These administrative law judges are issuing findings and interpreting their agency's guidance to basically de facto establish law. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. And they said that specifically with respect to the SEC, but this is going to reverberate throughout every branch of the federal government because, like I said, administrative law judges are in every federal agency, and they've basically been creating law. And they're not only are they not legislators, not only are they not responsible elected officials, held directly responsible by the voters, but they're not even real judges. The administrative law judge at one of the police departments I'm familiar with was basically an officer that was assigned to the court that was conducting hearings for seizures. Like, if you were pulled over and arrested for whatever, and they found money in your car, or they wanted to seize your car or whatever property, it was an officer of the court, an officer assigned to the court that was conducting the hearings and making these decisions. So, not even a lawyer, not even a judge, let alone an elected official. One other thing that I wanted to talk about was on one of the podcasts yesterday or the other day, they were talking about ETFs and why ETFs are important. And the phrase that hackled my feathers, that got under my skin was the quote, "Nobody over 50 is going to invest in Bitcoin." BS. And once again, I'm not a boomer, and I'm not angry man yelling at the cloud type thing going on here, but I want to remind you that, Adam Back is over 50, Hal Finney would have been over 50, Satoshi Nakamoto is probably over 50, a lot of the Bitcoin OGs are over 50, Greg Foss is over 50, Michael Saylor's over 50. All of these people are capable of grokking Bitcoin. The over 50 crowd that would be potentially buying Bitcoin through ETFs because they just don't understand the technology, or they're not comfortable buying and holding Bitcoin directly, don't want exposure to Bitcoin either. And it's not because they don't know how to program a VCR, dating myself, not knowing how to, buy and custody Bitcoin, or how to set up a node or create the entropy on a cold card or whatever. The point being, the people that are really close to retirement, obviously any investment advisor out there tells people, and this is not investment advice, I'm not an investment advisor, tells people that when you're really young, you can be super aggressive, you can take more risks with your retirement funds. But when you're older and you're closer to retirement, you might need that money next year or the year after that. You don't have a 10 or 20 year time frame. So they're just more cautious with their investments in general. The reason they're not into Bitcoin is because they've already got their retirement planned out. They know what their budget is, and they're just a couple of years away. They might not have a cycle to wait. They can't take, the huge volatility, the price swings, because that might make the difference between being able to eat or not, or be able to go to the dentist or not. And so it has nothing to do with the fact that they can't grok it, and everything to do with the fact that they're just more cautious with their investments. So it doesn't matter whether they're buying and holding Bitcoin in their hardware wallet or whether they'd be buying it in an ETF. If they need the money and they've plotted out their retirement and they know how much money they've got and they know how much money it's going to take each year to survive through retirement, they're not going to be investing in something as volatile as Bitcoin currently is. Maybe one day during hyper-Bitcoinization, obviously none of that will matter, because as Bitcoin becomes adopted as the global reserve currency, it'll be necessarily more stable. But the argument that we need an ETF because nobody over 50 is going to invest in Bitcoin without an ETF is just complete bullshit. Pardon my French. Last but not least, Janet Yellen was out there making stupid statement after stupid statement, and you probably heard her say something along the lines that Americans should prepare for a transition away from the dollar as a global reserve currency. I believe even Jerome Powell mentioned a couple of months ago that we were entering a world where there are going to be multiple global reserve currencies besides just the US dollar. Obviously, this is true. As Bitcoiners, we know this is true. As Bitcoiners, we know that people are moving away from the US dollar, that they should be moving away from fiat, and that fiat in general usually has about a 50-year lifespan, and the US dollar is, over 50 years old, so its time has come. But the Treasury Secretary doesn't ever admit to that. The chairman of the Federal Reserve doesn't ever admit to that. The fact that they are admitting to this, remember, they didn't even admit we were going to have inflation until after we had it. And then when we had it, they said it was transitory or that it was a good thing. Politicians just lie to you, especially when it comes to something that they're responsible for, that they have dominion over, that they have control over. If they're doing a bad job, they always tell you that they're doing a great job. Everything's coming up roses. So the fact that Janet Yellen is telling us that Americans should prepare for a transition away from the dollar as the global reserve currency should be setting off red flags and alarms to anybody that still values their wealth in fiat. All right, so back to why we're here, and that's because today is DCA Wednesday. What is DCA Wednesday, you might ask? Well, DCA is short for dollar cost averaging, and dollar cost averaging is an investment strategy where you invest your money in equal portions at regular intervals regardless of price. For example, this will be our 100th stack. That's amazing, isn't it? 100 stacks. It's hard to believe, but we started stacking $20 every Wednesday all the way back on July 28th, 2021. So far, we've stacked 99 times. We stacked a total of $1,980, including $44.55 in fees. And that has earned us a stack of 6,885,479 sats. And for the first time in a long time, we're not underwater on that stack because our average cost basis is $28,756.17. And that is cheaper than the current price of Bitcoin in US dollar terms. But the reason I am extra excited about this is because just yesterday, one of the trending posts on Reddit, on the r/Bitcoin Reddit, was someone who said that they had a goal they had set for themselves of owning a third of a Bitcoin. I think it might even just been 0.3 Bitcoin, which is almost a third. And they were worried that it was, with the price of Bitcoin going up, that they'd never achieve their goal. And I think we've already proven, we haven't stacked a third of a Bitcoin, but we're only stacking $20 a week. And in just 2 years of stacking consistently, we've stacked, almost 7 million sats. So they're talking 30 million sats, but still, 4 times more. If they'd been stacking $80 a month, they'd be there already because, some of the stacks were substantially cheaper than what we're going to stack at today. So I think we've already shown that even if you only have $20 we've definitely shown that even if you had only as little as $20 a week to convert from fiat into Bitcoin, you would have already amassed what could potentially be a life-changing amount of money one day. If Bitcoin ever hit $1 million per Bitcoin or higher, there's people out there forecasting $1 trillion Bitcoin. But just for fun, let's say our moon is $1 million Bitcoin. That'd be a stack worth $68,000, more than $68,000, which it's hard to say would not be a life-changing amount of money to the majority of the people in the world. Even to most Americans, $68,000 is a lot of money, especially in a country where they say the average person doesn't even have $500 in their savings account. But I digress. To make today's stack 100, as usual, as we've done all 100 times, we're going to use the handy-dandy Cash App. And Cash App is not a sponsor of the show. I cannot emphasize that enough. We do have a referral code in the show notes. Everyone who uses the Cash App has a referral code. I list it in the show notes because if you don't have Cash App and you want to use Cash App, if you click on that link and sign up for Cash App using that link and following their terms of service, you'll get $5 free for doing so. And you will also be tipping the podcast $5 for doing so. So you can help support the podcast, get paid to do so. But you do you. Cash App might not even be available where you're at, and it's certainly not the best app for everybody. So pick an app that you feel comfortable with. And if you choose to use Cash App, please consider clicking on that referral link to do so. So I already have $20 in the Cash App because somebody owed me $20 and paid me back. So I'm going to click Bitcoin, buy, enter $20, click confirm, and normally I say boom, but it's more like boom. We only purchased 64,901 sats. That is the lowest number of sats we've stacked I'm scrolling back, in over a year. The last time we purchased Bitcoin this expensive, the last time we purchased Bitcoin for over $30,000 US dollar was back on May 4th of 2022, more than a year and a month ago. And that's kind of depressing because the other thing it means is we're actually going to increase our average cost basis for the first time in a long time. So that purchase of 64,901 sats brings our total stack up to 6.9 million sats. That's 6,950,380 sats. It does raise our average purchase price to $28,775.41, $19.24 more than our average cost basis was before today's purchase. That is sad, but still a heck of a lot cheaper than when Bitcoin recaptures its previous all-time high. Obviously already cheaper than the current purchase price. And again, if Bitcoin does go to $1 million, that 6.9 million sats will be worth $69,503.80. Even if Bitcoin just sets a new all-time high at 100,000, that means the 2,000 US dollars we've converted into Bitcoin will be worth almost $7,000, $6,950.38 to be precise. Real quick, I want to ask those of you that are using Twitter users, to follow us on Twitter. We don't have that many Twitter subscribers on our Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast Twitter account. On Twitter, we are at BTC Bulletin Pod, at BTC Bulletin Pod. And the more people that subscribe to us on Twitter, the more likely our tweets will get featured on people's feeds, the more likely people will find out about the podcast, and the more people we will hopefully help orange pill. The more people like that guy on Reddit asking if it's too late. Folks, you're never too late. Even if Bitcoin becomes the global reserve currency, you'll still want to get into Bitcoin. Even if you're just transferring your fiat at a 1-to-1 ratio into Bitcoin with no appreciation, you won't be late. And, even with millions of people using Bitcoin, there are plenty more people out there every day just discovering Bitcoin for the first time, not even including the holy grail of that institutional money that people are chattering about particularly loudly right now. But if you want to help increase your value of Bitcoin, then help spread the word, help orange pill people, and help us do that by following us on Twitter. Again, it's at BTC Bulletin Pod on Twitter. Also, I'd like to hear from you. I want to know what you like about the podcast, what you don't like about the podcast, so send me a DM. DM me at BTC Bulletin Pod. Let me know what you think. Of course, you can also tip us via Twitter, or if you're listening on your favorite Podcasting 2.0 app. You can send us a boostergram and let us know what you think about the podcast. As usual, providing it's not a shill or something obscene, we read our boosts on the following episode of the Bitcoin Bulletin podcast. If you don't use Twitter, we are on Nostr. And if you're not on Twitter or Nostr, you can send me an email. My email address is bitcoinbulletin@protonmail.com. I'd just like to hear from you. But either way, do not forget to join us next Wednesday and every Wednesday while we grow that stack together. Thank you for stacking with us 100 times now. We're closing in on 2 years of stacking together. I believe it was July 28th, I said. So we're just a little over a month away from our 2-year anniversary. Of course, our first episode was not a DCA Wednesday, so our 2-year anniversary of the podcast is coming up even sooner than that. But 2 years of stacking went by really fast. So if you're one of those people that thinks you're too late, if you just get off of zero and just start putting away sats, and before you know it, you'll be in the same place we are when those sats have added up remarkably quickly, and 2 years have blown right by. And we're still before the halving. So, they say the best time to get into Bitcoin is 10 years ago, but the next best time is right now, and the best time has always historically been before the halving, because anything you convert before the halving, you're getting in before the new all-time high. And traditionally, after the Bitcoin sets its new all-time high, that price never really goes back to where it was before the halving. So again, not financial advice, not investment advice. You do you. But hopefully you've been enjoying listening to us and following along on our journey. If you are stacking, great. If you're not stacking, have fun staying poor, right? Just kidding. Kind of, but not really. Either way, thanks for listening, and we will see you next Wednesday for the next DCA Wednesday episode. But until that time, keep on stacking those sats, you sexy sat stackers.